Hello, everyone. I just wanted to emphasize a line of thought, a line of thinking that is displayed in Templin's essay. I went through this yesterday in class, but perhaps just for my own record, because I'm not, that smart. So if I actually understand something or think I understand something, it's good to put it down. But also just to play it out for you, because I think it's quite important, actually. It goes to the heart of not only this class, but the whole idea of engineering ethics. Some things that Templin says. The first, where he says that the first obligation to hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public, the first canon, arises from the professional nature of engineering work. This is the absolute starting point of the whole thing. The claim that engineering work has a certain nature and that the first canon emerges necessarily and naturally from the nature of that work. And what follows from that is, follows from that obligation, is that the execution of engineering tasks and duties thus requires a high degree of discretionary decision making and professional autonomy. So we start with the nature of engineering work, from which the first canon emerges, and from that emerges the idea that engineers need to have autonomy in order to do their work. And then um, the third important point: when the professional is employed, as most engineers are, the technical knowledge gap still exists, but part of the decision-making power is taken away from the professional and given the employer. This is about the clearest laying out of the fundamental problem of engineering ethics that you can get. And Templin's done us a big service here. This creates the problem. Engineering work, by its very nature, requires professional autonomy, and in the employment situation, the engineer does not have that autonomy. That's as simple and as clear a way as I've ever seen of it being laid out. So let's back up just a little bit here, um, to the first principle about the nature of engineering work. What is it? The comment I have here is engineers have the special knowledge and skills necessary both to do the work and to understand its risks to public safety and welfare. That is, just as a lawyer can presume to understand the nature of um, the law and its implications, a doctor, the nature of illness and its implications. So the engineer has the special knowledge to understand what is going on technically and to understand its implications for public safety and welfare. So they need to have the freedom, the autonomy to make decisions, both technical decisions and decisions about public safety. Of course, this is a topic that is addressed in George's essay, where he denies this to a certain extent, but that's philosophy or different ideas, different problems. But the way that Templin lays it out, the need for autonomy basically means, I think, that the professional must have the freedom to use their judgment, to make professional judgments. That's the whole idea of being professional. If there were a rule book for engineering and you could just do the work and understand its implications for public welfare by following rules, then there would be no need for engineers, and they wouldn't be professionals if there were. The execution of professional judgment, the need for it, is central to the idea of the profession. That is, that only lawyers can really make an informed decision in certain areas of the law, that only physicians can make an informed decision in certain areas of health, and only engineers can make an informed decision in certain areas of technology. So the employment situation, as the way that Templin lays it out, is that, well, yes, the technical knowledge gap still exists. That is, that the presumption that the engineer knows what they're doing and that others don't, which is one of the central things about it being a profession. But the autonomy, or at least part of it, is taken away. That, that is because of the employment situation. And as he says, traditionally, professionals have been regarded as people performing their work in private practice. So we see that the problem for the engineer, the employed engineer, is really not different from the problem of the doctor or the lawyer employed. And there are increasingly, that seems to be more and more the norm for doctors and lawyers. My understanding is that, especially with doctors, that more and more of them cannot be regarded as in private practice, private practitioners, someone who hangs up a shingle, goes into business for themselves, gets patients or clients, and is their own boss, basically. That idea, as Templin's quite right, is that that was just sort of understood in regarding law and medicine as a profession, that doctors and lawyers were their own bosses. So there wasn't this problem of supervision by non professionals and the lack of autonomy. It was just taken for granted that the professional had to be financially independent as to be professionally independent. So that is the problem. Templin, I think, in a very careful and very rational way, tries to deal with this situation after laying it out. He gives a kind of a proposed solution. And I think that everything that he proposes, to my mind, boils down to this notion of critical loyalty, this sort of compromise in a certain way. Um, that is, that the employed professional, an engineer or otherwise, can be expected to have a certain degree of loyalty to the organization that they work for, but that this loyalty is critical loyalty. It is not uncritical loyalty, therefore. It is not unthinking, automatic, absolute loyalty to the organization. It is critical loyalty. That is, it is loyalty limited by something, and that something is is professional ethics, and the engineers or other professionals primary loyalty as a so-called cosmopolitan employee to the profession and its values rather than to the organization. And here's the rub in a certain way, which also in class yesterday, really I think Ohm brought it up. Um, so that I responded to Ohm with this, that this is something that Templin says, which in a certain way I think is very, very good, but also kind of calls into question his solution, where he says that the moral requirements of professional ethics necessitate a qualification of the employment contract. That is, that to really have teeth, one may say. Um, his revisions of the fourth canon, which incorporate critical loyalty, basically, they need to be made explicit in the employment contract. That is, whether that employment contract is a written contract or just an implied contract, there has to be an understanding between the employer on the one hand and the employed engineer on the other, that the employed engineer, that they are not simply another, that they don't have the same status as a common employee, that their employment contract needs to explicitly recognize their cosmopolitanism, their critical loyalty. That is, the employment contract needs to explicitly recognize that the employed engineer's loyalty to the company is tempered by, limited by, their primary loyalty to the profession and its values. this needs to be made explicit in the employment contract, which I think is Templin is 100% correct, but it does bring up certain difficulties. And one of the things I said in class was, well, what do you think the NSPE and the Board of Ethical Review or the ethics people at the NSPE would think of this idea of a qualification of the employment contract? And my first thought is that they would be very much against it. And I think they'd be very much against it because it might hurt business. That is, it would complicate the hiring of engineers because if an employer knew and explicitly admitted that it was hiring somebody whose primary loyalty was not to them but to their profession, this might be a bump in the road for the business of engineering, just as it might be a bump in the road for the business of lawyering or doctoring. If the employer were to explicitly recognize that the employee that they were hiring did not have their primary loyalty to them, but their primary loyalty was to their profession. Not that it couldn't be done, not that in a certain sense it isn't done. I don't know. Maybe there is that understanding somewhere that when you hire a professional, it's not like hiring any other employee, that you're hiring somebody who's cosmopolitan, who can only give you critical rather than absolute loyalty. But I mean, what absolute loyalty would mean in a corporation, I'm not even really sure. Anyway, wanted to lay that out. Great article by Templin, teaches us a lot about the nature of engineering ethics and its problems.